I was standing on the northern ridge of my family farm, my father's farm, when I saw the for sale sign hammered into the frozen ground like a nail into a coffin. The sign was new. The frost hadn't even melted from the edges of the laminated sheet. But what stopped my breath wasn't the sign itself. It was the name beneath it. A local real estate broker. And under that, in neat bold print, pending buyer. This land had been in my family for 3 generations. I learned to walk between the fence posts, to drive a tractor before I ever drove a car, and to grieve here too, when my father died, and later, when my mother remarried a man who entered our lives like an unexpected cold front. His name was Cliff Porter, and from the start, something about him chilled the air around my mother. That morning, the wind whipped across the field in long, low sighs. My boots crunched the frost as I approached the sign, my breath coming in short bursts, not from the cold, but from fury. Because I knew, without seeing a single document, that my mother would never have approved this. Not willingly. And yet, her signature would be exactly where it needed to be. I leaned down, touched the corner of the sign, and felt my stomach twist. There were tracks, fresh, tire marks, 2 sets. Someone had driven up early, probably before dawn, to install this. They wanted to avoid being seen. That alone told me the whole truth before I had any proof at all. Cliff was selling our farm. I stood there as the morning sun struggled through the clouds, making everything look pale and drained. And that was when my phone buzzed. I looked down. A voicemail notification. My mother's number. Odd. She rarely left voicemails. I pressed play. Her voice trembled. Helen. I need to talk to you. Something's happened with the house, with the papers Cliff brought me. I think I made a mistake. The message ended abruptly. No explanation. No details. Nothing but the faint sound of her breathing too fast, panting almost, and a muted thud, as though something had fallen. I replayed it twice, each time feeling my heart climb higher in my throat. Then my phone buzzed again. A text. From Cliff. Just 4 words. Stay out of this. I felt the cold down to my bones. Because if he was warning me away, then I was already far too close to something he didn't want anyone to discover. The farm stretched quiet and empty around me, but something had shifted, something had cracked open. And as I looked at that for sale sign one last time, I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding or a hasty decision. This was betrayal. Calculated, silent, and deliberate. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that within a week, an attorney would call me with a discovery that turned everything upside down. A discovery that stopped the sale cold. A transfer block. And it was that single legal barrier, hidden deep in the paperwork, that would be the beginning of Cliff's downfall. But that morning, standing alone on the ridge, all I felt was the storm rising. And the unmistakable certainty that something very wrong had begun. Cliff had made his first move. And I was about to make mine. My name is Helen Ward, and I am 62 years old. I've lived long enough to recognize when a man's charm is just a mask stretched over greed. I've also lived long enough to understand patience, the kind of slow-burning persistence that outlasts bluster, intimidation, and deceit. My father used to say I had a mind like a ledger book, clear, organized, and not easily fooled. I never thought that skill would become a weapon, but in the months that followed, it did. I live 30 minutes from the farm now, in a modest house tucked behind a line of pines. I moved out after my father died, mostly because my mother wanted space to grieve without the echo of his boots in the hallway. She remarried 3 years later to a man she met at a community center dance. Cliff Porter was 10 years younger than she was, with immaculate hair, a loud laugh, and a habit of touching people on the arm when he talked to them. People liked him instantly. I didn't. He paid too much attention to my mother's financial stories, asking little questions disguised as casual interest. He nodded too slowly when she talked about inheritance plans. And he smiled, too widely, when he learned the farm was in her name. Still, she deserved companionship, and I wasn't going to stand in the way of that. Not at her age. Not after losing my father. But over time, I noticed her growing quieter. Less confident. Whenever Cliff was around, she deferred to him, about money, about decisions, even about chores she'd handled for decades. I'd ask if she was happy, and she'd give me a brittle smile. He's just strong-willed, Helen. It's nice not having to make every choice alone. Strong-willed was one way of putting it. Controlling was another. I didn't push her. I've learned that advice given too early becomes resentment later. But I did watch. And I listened. Which is why her voicemail, shaking, frightened, cut through me like a blade. My mother rarely made mistakes, especially with papers. She had survived droughts, storms, bank negotiations, and 2 recessions. But loneliness can soften a person's caution. And Cliff knew exactly which soft places to press. When I left the ridge that morning, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The kind that comes right before you step into a courthouse, or into a confrontation you can't avoid. I drove straight toward town, gripping the steering wheel tighter than I meant to. My thoughts kept circling the same unspoken truth. He must have put something in front of her. Something he claimed was harmless. Maybe a refinancing form. Maybe maintenance authorization. Something with fine print buried deep enough to hide a minefield. And she signed it. My mother, who once read every seed invoice line by line, signed something without question. That was the part one couldn't forgive. Not her, him. By the time I reached my driveway, I had already decided what I was going to do. I grabbed my old lockbox, the one with my father's documents, past land assessments, the original deed. I spread everything out on the dining table. Because before confronting Cliff, I needed to know what was at stake. I didn't know then that hidden among those yellowed pages was the first clue. The one that would eventually stop the sale. But I could feel something shifting already. And I was ready. The farm wasn't just land. It was our family's spine. My grandfather bought it after returning from the war. My father expanded it, acre by acre, until it became something close to a sanctuary. He worked hard, but he loved harder. Every fence post, every grain bin, every field in rotation carried some memory of him, his voice, his sweat, his steady patience. Growing up, the 3 of us, my father, my mother, and I, functioned like a small, rugged team. Our farm dinners were legendary among extended family. Long tables, mismatched chairs, everyone talking over each other, my father carving meat while my mother passed plates with quiet contentment. And when the sun dipped low, she would lean her head on his shoulder the way someone leans into a familiar melody. There was no question, they loved each other with the kind of certainty that anchors a household. When he died, heart attack, sudden, brutal, the farm went silent. My mother wandered through the rooms like someone searching for a lost sound. I tried my best to fill the quiet, helping with bills, with livestock, with decisions that used to fall to my father. But grief changes people. She withdrew from the community, then re-emerged slowly, cautiously, as though relearning the world. And that was when Cliff appeared. The first time she introduced him to me, I felt my stomach tighten, a warning my mother brushed off as overprotectiveness. He was charming in the way some men are charming to distract from what they're doing with their hands. He brought flowers, complimented her cooking, listened to her stories as though each one were a treasure map. But in the small silences, he glanced at the family photos with an calculating interest that left me cold. Still, my mother smiled more with him around. She dressed up again. She laughed. And I wanted so desperately for her to be happy that I ignored the shift in her posture whenever finances were mentioned. It wasn't until after their wedding that I saw cracks. She no longer made decisions confidently. She deferred to him on everything, weatherproofing, loan payments, feed suppliers. He discouraged her from calling me for help, insisting he had it under control. It was subtle isolation, not forceful, but effective. Our conversations grew shorter. Whenever I visited, he hovered, a presence too constant to ignore. And whenever I left, my mother hugged me longer than usual, whispering, "I'm all right, Helen. Don't worry." But something in her eyes contradicted her words. By last summer, she had stopped attending church potlucks. She skipped our usual birthday lunch. She sounded tired whenever I called, as though carrying a weight she didn't know how to describe. And then, a month ago, she told me she and Cliff were reviewing paperwork for estate planning. She brushed it off as routine. But now, I could see it clearly, they'd been setting the stage. That voicemail she left me? That wasn't fear of paperwork. It was fear of what she'd handed away. That afternoon, as I arranged my father's documents on the table, I felt the old family bonds tightening inside me. My father had trusted my mother. My mother had trusted Cliff. And now everything they built together was hanging in the balance. I wasn't going to let it fall. Not without a fight. The betrayal revealed itself slowly, like a bruise spreading under the skin. I showed up at the farmhouse the next morning. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast, though my mother hadn't cooked breakfast. She sat at the table in her robe, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't lifted. Cliff was nowhere in sight. Her eyes widened when she saw me, not in surprise, but in relief so profound it nearly broke me. "Oh, Helen," she whispered, "I didn't know if you'd come." I knelt beside her. "Tell me what happened." She looked toward the hallway, as though afraid he might appear. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin. "I signed something I didn't understand. Cliff said it was for tax purposes, to simplify things, but yesterday I got a letter from the bank about a pending ownership transfer. And the words looked different from what I remembered. I felt the world narrow. What did he ask you to sign?" She shook her head helplessly. "He said it was a joint management authorization." I didn't read the whole thing. He rushed me. A joint management authorization. I knew enough to recognize that phrase as a doorway to something else, something dangerous. Cliff had likely used it as a back door to initiate a sale without her explicit permission. I asked, "Where are the documents?" Her voice cracked. "He took them." "Of course he did." I searched her face. "Did you sign anything giving him full control?" She hesitated. I don't know anymore." That was when the front door opened. Cliff strode in with the exaggerated confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. He stopped short when he saw me. "Well," he said lightly, "look who decided to drop by." I stood. "We need to talk." "No, Helen," he said, slipping off his coat. "We really don't." My mother flinched at his tone. He grabbed a folder from the counter and tapped it smugly. "Everything is already in motion. There's no point getting emotional." My pulse thudded. "You mean the sale? The one she didn't approve?" He smirked. "She signed the authorization. That's approval." I stepped toward him. "Show me the paperwork." "No." He picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, and moved toward the door. "You're interfering in matters that aren't yours. Your mother and I have a plan. The farm is outdated. Selling is the right choice." My mother's voice rose in a small but desperate tremor. "Cliff, stop. I didn't agree to any sale." He paused, his expression shifting, annoyance thinning into something darker. "You agreed," he said quietly. "Whether you remember every detail or not." And with that, he walked out the door. My mother's breath hitched. I held her hand, grounding her. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was real. It was documented. And it was already in motion. By the next morning, I had shifted into a mode my father used to call quiet storm. Focused. Calm. Unrelenting. My first step was contacting attorney Nolan Kress, a man known for two things: impeccable ethics and a brain like a steel trap. I brought every document I had: deeds, tax records, old transfer notes. He spread them across his conference table with slow, deliberate precision. After 10 minutes of silence, he said, "Helen, I need to see the paperwork your mother signed. Without that, we're reconstructing the crime without the weapon." I told him Cliff had taken everything. He nodded. "Then we'll subpoena the bank and title office. Most filings leave a footprint. He can't hide the trail if he initiated a transfer." While Nolan began the legal process, I started my own digging. First, I visited the bank. The loan officer, a young man with kind eyes, hesitated when he saw me. "Mrs. Porter was here last month," he admitted quietly. She looked pressured. My stomach twisted. "Did she authorize anything?" He glanced around, then leaned in. "I can't disclose details. But I will say this, a transfer request like the one Mr. Porter attempted requires dual consent. And something about the signatures didn't match." That sentence lodged itself in my mind. Then, the county clerk's office. There, a clerk pulled up an early-stage filing entered under Cliff's name. Not yet public. Not yet finalized. But clearly indicating an intention to transfer majority ownership to himself. The clerk frowned. "Odd thing is, there's a flag on the file." "A flag?" "A transfer block. System generated. Usually triggered when there's a discrepancy in prior ownership conditions. Something left by a previous owner." My heart skipped. My father? Likely. I asked what the block meant. "It means the transfer can't go through until an attorney resolves the issue. Someone tried to override the block manually yesterday, but the system rejected it." Someone. Cliff. And the system had stopped him. That wasn't just luck, something in my father's old documents must have triggered the protection. That was the clue I'd sensed earlier. I hurried home and reopened every file my father had stored. And there it was, buried at the bottom of a dusty envelope. A retention clause, handwritten by my father and notarized 22 years ago. It stated, in the event of my death, should the property be transferred or sold by my spouse, my daughter, Helen Ward, must be notified and must provide written review prior to any change of title or sale. It wasn't full co-ownership. But it was a legally binding obstruction, a safeguard he had put in place because he trusted me to protect the land if necessary. My father had known. Somehow, he had known. I took the clause straight to Attorney Kress. He read it 3 times before leaning back with a slow exhale. "Well," he said with a satisfied smile, "this changes everything. This clause activates the transfer block. And unless you personally approve the sale, no transaction can move forward." My breath steadied. "So Cliff can't sell the farm?" "Not without committing fraud," Nolan said. "Which, from the sound of it, he may already have attempted." A quiet storm indeed. The tide had turned. But Cliff didn't know that yet. And when he did, the consequences would begin. I spent the next 2 days preparing. While Attorney Kress gathered evidence of fraudulent initiation, I gathered something just as powerful, the truth of my mother's state of mind. I needed to show she had been manipulated into signing documents she didn't understand. So I recorded her recollection, gently, carefully, while she described the pressure Cliff applied, the rushed signatures, the missing explanations. She cried twice. I stopped the recording both times, letting her breathe, letting her reclaim her composure. Meanwhile, Nolan prepared an injunction to freeze all attempts to alter the property title. When he told me it was ready to file, a strange calm washed over me. I wasn't afraid of confrontation anymore. I was ready for it. That evening, I drove back to the farm. The sun hovered low, setting the field in amber light. Cliff's truck was parked crookedly in the drive, always the same sign of his impatience. I stepped inside without knocking. He was in the living room with a stack of binders and a laptop open, spreadsheets glowing on the screen. My mother was nowhere in sight. He didn't look up. "You need to stop coming here uninvited." I closed the door quietly. "We need to talk." "No. You need to leave." His voice sharpened. Your mother and I have already decided. Stop, I said. Something in my tone made him look up. I placed a single piece of paper on the table between us. The notarized retention clause. My father's handwriting. Cliff stared at it, confused at first, then increasingly pale. What is this? He asked. It's the reason you can't sell the farm, I said evenly. My father put a review requirement in place. Any sale needs my written approval. He scoffed. This is ancient. Irrelevant. It's active, I said. And it triggered a transfer block at the county office. He froze. I continued, slowly and deliberately. The sale is halted, Cliff. Permanently, unless I approve it. And I don't. His expression hardened into something dangerously restrained. Your mother signed. She signed under pressure and without full disclosure. We have recordings of her explanation. And your transfer attempt left a trail. He stood abruptly. This is none of your business. It is legally my business, I said. My father made sure of that. He laughed once, sharp and humorless. You think you've won? No, I said softly. This isn't a game. This is our home. And you tried to steal it. He opened his mouth to argue, but I continued, my voice steady as stone. There's an injunction being filed tonight. Any attempt to alter ownership from this point forward is criminal. Including the documents you initiated without proper consent. You should choose your next actions very carefully. He stepped back, eyes narrowing. You don't know what you're doing. Oh, I do, I said. For the first time, I do. The room went silent. He stared at me with a mixture of rage and calculation. Then he said, You're making a mistake. I held his gaze. No, Cliff. You did. And for the first time since he entered our lives, he didn't have a retort ready. Just a crack in his expression. A sign that he knew the tide had shifted. And I wasn't finished. Not yet. The fallout began quietly, too quietly for a man like Cliff. Attorney Kress filed the injunction the next morning. By noon, the county office flagged the sale as legally obstructed. The real estate broker withdrew the listing. The pending buyer, some development company Cliff had likely charmed, terminated negotiations. Within 24 hours, Cliff's entire plan collapsed. The first consequence came when the bank called him for verification. They needed to question the discrepancies in signatures and confirm dual consent. My mother, with trembling but resolute clarity, stated she had not agreed to any sale. I was beside her during the call, gently squeezing her hand. When she hung up, she exhaled shakily. I didn't realize how much he'd convinced me I was helpless, she murmured. You're not, I said. Not anymore. That afternoon, the bank froze all transaction attempts initiated by Cliff. He stormed into the farmhouse, shouting about interference, sabotage, and betrayal. But the shouting no longer worked on my mother. She sat upright. Silent. Firm. When he realized intimidation held no power, he switched tactics. He tried persuasion. You know this place drains us financially, he told her. Selling would give us a future. My mother shook her head. The only thing draining me is the fear you created. He turned to me, fury simmering. You did this. Yes, I said calmly. And I'll do more if necessary. The second consequence arrived 2 days later. A county investigator showed up, clipboard in hand. She asked to speak to both my mother and Cliff. The questions were polite but pointed. Why were signatures inconsistent? Why was a sale initiated without recorded approval of the secondary reviewer? Why did the authorization form lack page numbers, a common red flag for document tampering? Cliff's composure cracked in real time. He stammered, contradicted himself, grew visibly defensive. My mother, meanwhile, answered questions with shaky honesty, admitting she had been rushed, pressured, and misled. The investigator nodded thoughtfully through the entire interview. When she left, she handed me her card. "Ms. Ward," she said quietly, "if your mother needs support services, or wishes to report financial coercion, there are resources available." I thanked her. Cliff watched her card disappear with a trapped look in his eyes. The third consequence came from people he underestimated, his employer. Word travels quickly in small towns, especially when legal notices become part of public record. His supervisor called him in to discuss concerns about integrity. He came home that evening furious, slamming cabinets, muttering threats. But even anger couldn't cover the panic beginning to leak through the seams. And then came the final blow. Attorney Kress called him directly. His voice, firm and unyielding, carried through the speakerphone. "Mr. Porter, you are hereby notified that continued attempts to interfere with the restricted property title may result in charges of fraud, coercion, and misrepresentation. Any further action you take will be documented and used in formal proceedings." Cliff didn't speak. He just stared at the wall, jaw tight. His downfall wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet. Systematic. The way truth dismantles a lie, piece by piece. And we weren't done yet. Not quite. In the weeks that followed, the house settled into a strange stillness. Cliff stopped speaking to my mother entirely. He moved into the spare room, though he often slept elsewhere, nights spent at bars, or in his truck, or with friends willing to listen to his version of events. But the community wasn't buying it. Too many people had seen my mother's gradual withdrawal. Too many remembered how she used to be before he came along. The county investigation remained open. The bank continued auditing his attempted transfer. And at work, his hours were reduced pending review. All the walls he leaned on, all the structures he depended on, cracked at once. Meanwhile, my mother began to breathe again. At first, she apologized daily. For signing. For trusting him. For not seeing the danger. I kept telling her the same thing: loneliness is not a flaw. But people who exploit it are. Gradually, her voice steadied. She cooked again. She tended to her garden. She went back to church. Each small step was like watching her reclaim a room inside herself that she had once abandoned. One afternoon, she surprised me by asking, "Helen, do you think I should end the marriage?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked, "What do you want?" She took a long breath. "I want peace." Peace. Something she hadn't known since marrying him. Over the next 2 weeks, she spoke with a family counselor, then with Attorney Kress. She learned her rights, her protections, her options. And slowly, she came to a decision. When she told Cliff she was filing for separation, he barely reacted. The fight had drained out of him. He didn't argue. Didn't shout. He simply nodded and said, "Fine." But beneath that single word, I sensed a hollow surrender. The kind a man gives when every path he once relied on has closed. During the separation process, my mother discovered more: unpaid bills he had hidden, credit applications he attempted without her knowledge, and purchases charged to joint accounts he'd coerced her into opening. None of it surprised me. But seeing the pattern laid bare gave her the final clarity she needed. One morning, she said, "I'm done living in fear of someone else's choices." And I believed her. When the paperwork was finalized, Cliff packed his things into 2 duffel bags. He paused in the doorway, glanced at both of us, and said, "You'll regret this." I met his eyes calmly. "No, Cliff. We already regretted letting it go on this long." He left without another word. The house felt lighter within hours. The farm looked brighter. Even the old oak near the barn seemed to stand taller. My mother and I walked the property that evening, the sun sinking gold behind the western fields. She touched the bark of the oak and whispered, "I thought I lost everything." "You didn't," I said. "You just forgot what was yours." She nodded slowly. And for the first time in a long while, she smiled with her whole face. A smile that looked like sunrise. We were not just recovering. We were rebuilding. Together. Months have passed now. The fields are green with early growth, and my mother has regained her footing, steady, present, confident in ways I feared she had lost forever. She attends community meetings again. She hosts Sunday lunches like she used to. And sometimes, when the evening light hits the kitchen just right, she looks 20 years younger. The farm is safe. Legally. Financially. Emotionally. The land remains in our family name, my father's legacy intact. As for Cliff, his downfall completed itself without any intervention from us. His employer terminated him after their integrity review. The county's investigation into fraudulent documentation concluded with a formal reprimand and a permanent note on his public record. He didn't go to jail, my mother didn't want that, but his reputation suffered in a way prideful men feel deeply. He moved out of state shortly after the separation finalized. I don't know where he went. I don't need to know. Some chapters close without epilogues. When I think back on everything, I realize something important: evil doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it enters gently, with compliments and steady hands. But manipulation is quiet. Coercion is quiet. Betrayal unfolds in whispers long before it shouts. The louder part, the collapse, only comes later. My father's retention clause saved us, yes. But something deeper saved us too. My mother's courage to admit fear. My willingness to listen to my instincts. The truth, persistent and patient, rising through layers of deceit. I've spent my life believing strength meant endurance. But this experience taught me a different kind of strength, the strength to intervene, to question, to confront, even when doing so breaks the peace temporarily. Peace built on silence is not peace. So here is the moral I carry, and the one I offer to anyone listening. Trust your quiet warnings. Those gut-level whispers are often the first sign that something is wrong. And when someone you love is being slowly diminished, gently erased, or persuaded into shadows, step in. Even if they tell you they're fine. Especially then. Revenge, for me, was never about punishing Cliff. It was about restoring balance. Correcting the narrative. Replacing fear with truth. Reclaiming what was nearly stolen. Standing here today, watching the field stretch out under the setting sun, I feel something I haven't felt in years: calm. The kind that settles deep inside the chest. The kind that comes when justice has run its course, not loudly, but thoroughly. My mother joins me on the ridge sometimes. She rests her hand on my arm and says, "Your father would be proud of you." I hope he is. Because every step of this story, the confrontation, the evidence, the patience, the unyielding insistence on truth, began with something he taught me long ago. Protect what is yours, but never with cruelty. Protect it with clarity. And that is what I did. This land remains ours. Our story remains intact. And peace, earned, honest, steady, has finally come home.